Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Pearson English Assessment Teacher Training Academy second webinar. I hope that you got the message yesterday and the fact that there was a slight mistake in the Zoom date. So the webinar is planned originally for the 25th, so today. I hope that you got the message, and I can see that people are joining. There is a Q&A section open. And the Teacher Training Academy started a month ago. We had a very first session on perseverance in teaching development. So I was sharing with you the ideas, what you can do to persevere in your teaching development. How can you persevere in making inroads in the new territory, for example, like doing the digital testing solutions? How can you prepare your students, and what can you do to help yourself to stay on track? The end of the academy is planned by the end of this year. So this is the whole year project. And please remember, as the information on the website, for those of you who attend the 7 sessions, we prepared a gift pack, and we'll share with you the Credly badge, so the digital credential, then you can use in your business professional development. Today, we'll talk about online testing. Okay, we'll talk about the online testing. We'll talk about AI accuracy and human development. So the original plan was to have Lottie Harrison with us, but the life has its tendency and uniqueness to offer different adventures, so she couldn't join. And we've got a different person, but probably looking at his experience, the best we can get when it comes to automatic scoring and the digital testing solution. So we have David Booth with us. Nice to have you here, David. If you could tell us a few words, who you are as a person, and why is it you that deals with this sphere of testing environment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bartek. My role is the director of test development at Pearson. So I kind of oversee most of the high stakes and in fact the medium stakes tests which Pearson produce. So developing those tests and also the items that go in those tests and the scoring. Actually, I come from a teaching background, so I taught mainly in the Far East for about 10 or 15 years. Did quite a lot of teacher training, and then when I came back to the UK, thinking about 1999, I think it was, then I started work with Cambridge Assessment. So I've got quite a lot of experience in doing paper and pencil testing, and also in fact computer-based testing, because Pearson were developing at that time computer-based tests, and I was responsible actually in the early days for computer-based IELTS. Mm-hmm. So yes, I worked at Cambridge, and then I worked at Pearson. When I came to Pearson, Pearson were developing these high stakes tests using automated scoring, which was very new to the testing market. So a lot of people have views on that. So certainly I came into it fairly even-handed. I understand the benefits of paper and pencil, traditional type testing, but also digital testing as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So it's good that you mentioned the very first element, because I wanted to ask you, how did it all start that at some point the decision was made to move from traditional, let's say, forms of testing, pen and paper, into something which was not present in the market, into the unknown territory? And what was the market reactions, if you could share with us?
Yeah, sure.
Bits of history.
Yeah, I think I know the history because I think I'm part of the history in a way. So, I mean, in the beginning, I mean, there was computer-based assessment, and as I say, Cambridge and others, in fact, TOEFL as well, they developed computer-based assessment. And one of the things that was developed in the very early days was adaptive testing. And we at Pearson, we used adaptive testing as well, computer-based adaptive testing for the level test. Excuse me. So that's a technological aspect that was in play in the kind of late 90s, early part of this century, the 2000s. The difference in terms of Pearson was this adoption of automated scoring, and particularly automated scoring of speaking and writing. Now, you can do automated scoring of things like reading and listening when you have what are very simple response formats like multiple choice. So that multiple choice enables you to do a scoring using a computer. And those technological devices have been around for a long time. What was also trialed, but failed actually, was trying to read the script of the learner. So machines that were trying to read what the learner had written. But these proved fairly inaccurate. So they couldn't really get the level of accuracy required for an assessment purposes. So the other developments, and these developments came mainly out of the United States. And there were two areas which were developed. One was the automated scoring of speaking. And this was a group based out of Stanford University. And again, I don't want to keep mentioning Cambridge's name, but this is the past. But when I worked for Cambridge, we were talking to the guys in Stanford as well, looking and thinking about adopting their technology. But in fact, it proved to be too expensive for us at the time. So we didn't actually go into partnership with them. The opposite happened at Pearson. Pearson were developing PT Academic, and they wanted this automated scoring as well. It had been used in a test in Holland, in the Netherlands. And the guy who developed that test was also developing PT Academic. So he knew about this technology. So he got into partnership with the guys from Stanford. And then they started looking at how they could use their technology to do the automated scoring of speaking. At the same time, Pearson purchased a publishing group in the States who had developed the technology for the automated scoring of writing. And this was out of the University of Colorado. So the University of Colorado developed this approach to scoring writing. And they'd then been bought by a group in America, and then Pearson bought that group. So Pearson then had this technology to hand that could score writing, and a partnership with the people in San Jose or in Silicon Valley, which could score speaking. So because they had that, then they could apply that, and applied it first to PT Academic, and since then to a lot of other tests that Pearson produced.
Yeah, so we've got the level, the benchmark, the Pearson English International Certificate with the Teacher Training Academy. And then, because it's interesting to know, this was the bold step. So what was the market's reaction when the world of teaching just faced and tried to sample the automatic scoring and testing? How did they react?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because there is at play in the testing market sometimes a dichotomy between the psychometric type of testing, which is measurement based. So you need to measure somebody's language proficiency. Yeah. And then there's the demonstrating or performance testing. So, allowing people to use language in a novel or new way, or allowing people to express themselves using language, either spoken or written. And from the US perspective, the US was more focused on the psychometric types of testing. So within the US and within certain markets, and good examples are India and the Philippines, that kind of psychometric approach was appreciated and understood. And so the market is saying, yes, we want tests which are based around measuring somebody's psycholinguistic ability. And we're happy for that to be quick, because, doing that can be quite quick. You can excuse me, I'm going to get a drink of water in a second, but you
No
can
worries.
actually do those kind of tests. Some of them are in like 20 minutes to get an assessment of somebody's language ability, because it's just focused on measuring the underlying traits that somebody has. Now, in other markets, for example, Europe, there's a much more resistance to this kind of testing. The tradition there is to test what you teach. So if you're teaching certain things in your curriculum, then you think that your testing should follow the kind of things that you're teaching. So, for example, if you're teaching students how to discuss something, or integrated testing as well, taking a piece of reading and then turning that into a conversation, or doing a listening, those kind of things are much more familiar to the kind of European and probably I would say South American markets as well, where the focus there is very much on communicative ability. So that's where there's a bit of a more resistance within the learning and the pedagogical community to these more psychometric type measurements.
And is it changing from your perspective when you look at the
Yes.
history? Is this changing towards the like more openness and acceptance towards this type of testing?
I mean, one of my colleagues from the British Council actually years ago said, education is often runs behind society, particularly in terms of its adoption of technology. And I think that might be true. I think educators are a little bit resistant to adopting some elements of technology. But I think it does happen. And I think that more and more teachers are using, obviously the pandemic had a big impact on this. Because then people are using much more kind of systems like Zoom and in order to communicate, and Zoom classrooms. I mean, I know teachers who, within days had set up methods for dealing with students who are sat in their own home. I mean, remarkable, but they just adapted to that requirement. And I think in terms of people's acceptance of technology and acceptance of AI, I mean, with the caveats, I mean, it's not like, oh yeah, great, AI is great. But I think people understand that technology moves on. There are benefits to be had from adopting it. And, you don't want to get totally left behind, really.
Okay. So the trend is changing. We are offering more and more the versatile solutions, and this automatic scoring is within the realities already here and now. And looking at from your perspective, what's the most significant advantage of using AI for online testing or automatic scoring for online testing? Is it about the speed? Because one of the key elements is like we keep saying this is the fast result turnaround, or is there something different that would make this big difference from your point of view?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, also just to say, and this is a kind of aside, but I think it's important that, using AI in scoring, Pearson have been doing that for the last 15 years or more, using these technologies that were developed in the States. This is not generative AI. This is not, using an application to write your essay or things like that. It's a very, very different application, but it's using AI, which an AI, people say AI, and they think they know what it means, but you need to define what AI is. And AI really is the algorithms and that are there, which the computer uses, the computer power that the computers have nowadays, which is far greater than it was when I first started using with computers. And then there's all the data that there exists out there, and then that is what then becomes AI. And then you get onto the point where the machine itself is doing the learning rather than the human. People say, well, what are the parameters that you give the automated scoring? And you can say, well, I don't really know, because the machine decides what the parameters is to give somebody a score. And that people find that a difficult thing to think about, because what they think happens is the human tells the machine what to look for, the machine looks for it, and then gives you a score. But that is not the way that AI in assessment's going. The way that AI in assessment's going is The computer will look at the data, the huge range of data, and decide what is a good answer, what is a less good answer. But when you talk about the advantages in terms of speed, yes, speed is fine. I mean, the computer, you can have your spoken test scored in a minute or less than a minute, depending what the traffic is like. Depends how much traffic there is over the internet. It's practically immediate. So that is an advantage. But the real advantage, and this is a difficult message to give sometimes, the real advantage is consistency. So a machine, despite whatever you think about the problems of a machine, it's very consistent. So for example, if you give the machine a bit of speech, this is a test taker, a student, this is the bit of speech, they score it, they say, right, that's worth 4 points out of 10. You give it to the machine again, and the machine will say, yes, that's worth 4 points out of 10. You give it to the machine again, and the machine will say, yes, that's 4 points out of 10. And that doesn't matter the number of times you give that piece of speech to the machine will tell you the same result every time. You give that same piece of speaking to a human marker, the human marker will go, oh, yes, I think that's 4 points. You give it to another human marker, they'll say, oh, yes, that's 6 points. You give it to another human marker, they'll say, oh, yes, that's 3 points. You give it to the same marker the next day, the one who gave it 4 points, they'll say, oh, I think that's 5 points. So human beings, and it's the nature of being human, we are variable in terms of how we assess the scores of a particular bit of performance. So if we see the same student or we see different students, we don't necessarily give comparable scores. The machine will always give the same score for that performance based on the training that machine has had. And that's the important bit as well. Behind the scenes, the machine is not some kind of automaton. The machine has been trained using data, using the algorithms, and that's how the machine can come up with that. But it's consistent over time. And also, it doesn't matter what time of day. If I'm scoring somebody's essay at 10 o'clock in the morning, you're full of beans, I'm, woken up, I'm back at work, I'm sitting at my desk, If I'm scoring somebody's essay 10 o'clock at night, am I the same? Am I going to work in the same way? I don't think so. I'm human, I get tired. I've got to score, I've got to mark all this stuff before tomorrow. Oh, there's a deadline. I've got to mark this stuff before 11 o'clock. Otherwise, these test takers won't get their results tomorrow, and they need them. So, the human being gets stressed. It changes your behavior. And the machine doesn't matter. 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night, it's going to give the same response.
So it's not like their cognitive resources will dry out. As you mentioned, like the evening work, especially when there is close to deadline, there's a tendency to rush. For the machine, it's all the time 100% capacity of the resources, and it's that they are all applicable in the same manner. But you've mentioned that the training, and I once heard that there is a lot of human within the automatic scoring or AI engine. So that there is a lot of human input on effort implemented into it. So it's not only like computer. And if you could help our audience understand this element a bit.
Yeah.
And is it true in the first place that there is a lot of human inside?
Yes, every item that we put into our tests has gone through a process which we call human rating and engine training. That's what we call the process. So when we have a field test, or when we have if we pre-test our items, we collect the responses from the test taker. Okay, so we collect hundreds of responses. Okay, and they are used to train the automated scoring. So we got the we have the responses, and then we have teams of markers. They mark all these responses, and we mark hundreds, probably thousands. If we look at the, I won't go into the too much in detail, but if you look at the trait level, so you might think this item is about writing. It's a writing item. However, within that writing, there may be some what we call traits. So there may be a content trait. There may be a grammatical accuracy trait. There may be a vocabulary, breadth of vocabulary trait. So, we're not just measuring one thing, somebody's writing, we're measuring different aspects of somebody's writing. So all of that is scored independently by human scorers. And when I say independently, they're just looking at that particular area. So they're just looking at the vocabulary, give it a score. Just looking at the grammar, give it a score, so that they're not impacted by the what we call the halo effect, which is, you give a score and then that makes you think that the next score should be similar, which is what happens with humans as well. Human gives the first score of 3. They give the second score of 3. They give the third score of 4 because it's slightly better, and then they go back and give it 3. The human has a whole series of biases, which we try to take out of the process. So we try to mitigate all that bias from the human examiners that we use. But we use a small team, highly trained, and they rate it twice. And if the raters agree, fine. If not, it goes to a third person who either agrees with one or other of the raters, or sometimes very, very exceptionally comes up with another score. So we use those raters to give us the information and data about, well, this was the piece of writing. These are the scores that the raters gave, the human raters gave. We put that data into the machine, into the automated scoring engine, and then the automated scoring engine looks at that, looks at the relationship between the quality of the test taker's response, the scores that they got, and then that's the scoring model as such, based on all the data of these test takers who've done the test. So that produces the model that is then used for scoring, and we do it for every single item. So this is done on an item level. So each item has its scoring model, so to speak, and associated. So it's not based on. There are some generalized models, particularly to do with things like fluency and pronunciation. But for a lot of the content-based and the grammatical and the vocabulary-based, each model is separate for that particular item, that particular test item. In a way,
go
on, sorry.
Go on. So
I was going to say.
Go on.
I was just going to say, in a way, what happens is we do all the work up front. Rather than the test taker taking a test and then all the scoring happens afterwards. We've done all the kind of preparation before the test taker takes the test. So we know what the scores should be, and therefore that's why it's quick. It's quick because all the work is done beforehand, not post-test.
So if I get you right, this is about this consistency, as you mentioned before, and this training. This is something that gives really strong foundations for the accuracy and the test being reliable. Do we get you right? That this is the element, so that the scoring could be treated with this high dose of percentage of that this is accurate and reliable, and it will be accurate and reliable whenever you take the test around the world.
Yeah, and it's like anything, I mean, it's based on, for example, how many samples you use. Clearly, the more samples of student responses you use, the better your model. Okay. So, if you use hundreds or thousands of student responses as we do, then we get quite an accurate model of language proficiency and what it means on this particular question to get 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 2 out of 5, or 1 out of 5. So, the automated scoring is predicting, this is a 3, this is a 4, this is a 5, based on all the data that it's got from those human panelists. And the more data it's got, the better it's going to do its job.
Okay, I assume that this engine is in constant cooperation with human being. It's not like it's been created, trained, and then off you go, do it on your own. So
Yeah,
I assume
yeah.
that there are
It has to be
teams which
updated. Yeah.
monitoring this process, and it's being developed as this is like, I would say, a living organism in a way.
Yeah, we're constantly developing new test questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the scoring, the automated scoring is constantly being updated as the new questions come in. And we do look at improving the actual scoring engines themselves. There's something called error rates. So some of the technology relies on transposing the spoken word into the written word. So you kind of transcribe, this is what the test taker said, and then the machine moves it into a written word so that it can actually use that more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And there's error rates between what the person said and what the transcription of that is. Okay. We have professional transcribers who do a lot of the work as well. Again, this is part of the engine training, the transcribing process.
Mm-hmm.
But no new technology as speech recognition technology has advanced, then these error rates have gone down. So what we have been doing over the years is introducing different speech recognition technology so that we increase the accuracy of that transcription from spoken to written. And the higher the accuracy between those two forms, the more accurate the engine scoring is.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you mentioned the speech recognition, because from my perspective, it's not like it's controversial, but for some of the teachers and trainers around the world, this speech recognition sounds really new to them. You can mark the reading and writing, but speaking in front of the computer and answering question like as if you are answering them live in front of a human being. How is it possible that this engine can rate them? And another question is like, we do hear from time to time about the accent. So since we live in a global village and there are different accents, and this is, I believe, the form of traditional teaching long time ago, that you should sound native like. The more native like you sound, the better you are. If you could
Yes.
share your thoughts on this.
Yeah. What was the first guy? The second question, yes, I got the first question.
About the speech recognition, that the person is speaking in front of the computer and
Right.
answering the
I've got
question
it.
naturally as a normal conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is interesting if for people on the line here who are involved in assessment, because one of the limitations of automated scoring is actually related to the prompts that you use in the automated scoring. The machine is much better at scoring things which are predictable. So, for example, you'll notice in tests that we do, one of the items is called a repeat sentence. You hear a sentence and you repeat it, right? So the machine knows what it expects to hear. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's been trained on, as I say, these hundreds of thousands of responses. So it's got a good idea about the different levels of performance of a person repeating that sentence. So that's where automated scoring works very well on those kind of items. Now, we also have more extended items, like, for example, describing a picture or retelling a story. But at the same time, the content is still restricted. Yeah? And if you look at exams with an examiner, with a human examiner, in a way, they are also restricted. I mean, again, I don't want to go on about other examination providers, but when I worked at Cambridge, what we did a lot there was make sure that when somebody went into the test room, we gave the examiner a script, and the examiner had to follow that script. And if the examiner didn't follow that script, then they weren't really assessing the person effectively, because what they were doing was they were changing the way the assessment was working, and it wasn't fair because if they start just chatting to the test taker about, you know, what they did last week, or, you know, what their plans are for the future, then that's not fair if the other student gets different questions. So the whole point of assessment really is to try and constrain the actual, you know, what the test taker, what the student is asked to do, so that you can score it. Now, that has its limitations in automated scoring. Now, in terms of accent, that's a very good point. Now, what we try to move away from, and we do not use what you might call the native speaker standard. Okay, so you know, you say, well, you know, the object of many people was to sound like a native speaker. I don't know if that's really
The
true.
dream of the all
Actually,
education, yes. So that I would
I
be
don't
mistakenly taken for a person living in England. Yeah.
really, yes, that must be you, boss. I don't think it's generally, but what people do want is to be understood. So that's the key thing. Whether, you know, whether you have an accent that is, you know, Polish or Chinese or Brazilian or French, you know, it shouldn't impact the fact that you can be understood by other people. And, you know, we all know that most communication in English is not done between a person, say, from France and a person from England. It's not. It's a person from France and a person from Germany, or a person from Italy and a person from China. This is where most English interaction occurs. So most English interaction is from people who've learnt English as a second language, who don't have English as their first language. And the key thing for them is intelligibility. And that's what we score. We don't score native speakerness. We you know, the question to us is, how well could this person be understood by another speaker of English, regardless of what their first language is? So intelligibility is a key thing. And some of our tests, some of the Versant tests now report intelligibility as a separate skill. And they'll say your intelligibility score is 4, your intelligibility score is 8. So it gives you a kind of idea about how easy it is for other people to understand you. And again, the automated scoring engines can do this because they can focus on those particular bits of conversation that make it easier to be understood and not. A human could do it, but again, they tend to be inaccurate in their, in their estimation of how intelligible as a particular person is. So yeah, so
I
the
would see
native
as
speaker is not.
as a human, like listening to a test taker with a beautiful English accent. Just it sounds to me like, oh, probably a slightly higher grade because he must
Yeah.
be a better language speaker. So it's not the case with the automatic scoring, whereas this intelligibility is the feature to look for, not the accent.
Well, there are so many factors that can impact on a score if you have a human examiner. And yes, as you say, it could just be, I mean, if you're like me, if the person you're examining is, has similar interests to you, or, is a
Yes.
similar age, or you're attracted to them, or whatever. There's all these different things that come into it. And yeah, people judge people very strongly on accents. Accent is a societal aspect which people can become very judgmental about it, and that they're always dropping. I mean, in English, you have this, they're always dropping their H's. So accent is about class. It's about money. It's not, accent's got all these social conventions associated with it, which, examiners are human, and therefore they have these same social conventions in their head. They can't get rid of them. He's from the public school, or, he's a grammar school boy, whatever. There's all these social things going alongside it. Obviously, the machine has none of this. The machine has no biases in terms of gender, in terms of what somebody looks like, in terms of what their social class is, or where they come from, or the machine doesn't care really.
So from the
just generates that score based on the data it's got.
Okay, so from the perspective of a prep teacher, exam prep teacher, it would be smart to convey the message for the test takers that work hard on making your message easily understood
Yeah.
for different person.
Yeah.
And if you'll be able to convey the message, that's when you're gonna be successful in life and the computer-based testing, because this is what we are measuring, and this is what will help you in everyday conversation, as you mentioned, that not every day you are speaking with someone with a native speaker, and a different countries, rather like international mixture of people from
Yeah.
different countries. And looking at
And I always think
yeah.
that I also think that, students, if you preparing students for an exam, the number of times I've found students who, for some reason or other, they don't seem to be engaged. The key thing for taking a test is to be engaged. You'll perform the best you can on the questions that are being set to you. That is to your advantage. So if you can do that, and you look, prepare, obviously prepare yourself so you know what's going to come in the test, and then engage with it. If it's a picture, describe the picture. If it's a sentence, repeat that sentence as best you can using the language and the linguistic resources you have. That you've learned the language to a degree, and then the machine will assess to what extent what your score is and where you are on that kind of scale.
Super. And we had those advantages. We had this engine training, this human interaction, and being reliable, accurate, consistent, and fast. But honestly, as usual, the life is life, and reality is like, can we think of any potential drawbacks for the test takers, or for the teachers who aim for the exam preparation courses, that can happen, those challenges that can take place, and how can they prepare, or how can they design a plan to overcome them when it comes to the automatic scoring and testing?
Yeah, I think you can overcomplicate things, really. I think it's the machines are looking at basically the underlying linguistic ability of the test taker. So the best thing to do in terms of preparation, apart from familiarity, is to actually improve your English language skills. So and a lot of our stuff nowadays gives quite good feedback. So you take a test like Benchmark, for example, and there's lots and lots of feedback as to what you can learn, and how you can improve your skills. We have something embedded in our all our course books and all our tests, which is called the Global Scale of English, and that underpins all the things that we do and allows us to give good feedback back to the test taker, back to the teacher, to say, right, your listening skills are weaker. This is an area you should prepare for. These are materials that you could use to prepare. So I think that's important, that when you look at mid-stakes type testing or proficiency testing, that we're giving as much positive feedback to the test taker and to the teacher, so that can direct their learning. And that, I think, is important for what's going to happen in the future. I think assessment for learning is something people are talking about now a lot, and linking up those learning materials with the assessment materials is very important, I think. But some of the limitations of computer-based scoring or AI scoring is what I said before, that you have to constrain the task in order to make the best use of the machine. And some people, some teachers and educators think that you should have more freer tasks within an assessment. I mean, to be frank with you, I make the point that most assessments are not like that. Learning is like that. Teaching is like that. You need to have that free expression. But then when it comes to assessment, there has to be this level playing field. And that tends to mean that things which are outside of what the expectation is within the test won't be scored.
Okay. So constrain the test. So you need to be fully aware that what is the test expecting from you when you are answering the question. So the free
Yeah.
trade, teaching, education, open conversation when it comes to testing and describe image or repeat sentence. So be open within those limits that the item task is giving to you, because this is where you will be scored.
Yeah. So you have to develop your English language ability,
Mm-hmm.
and then that will help you get a high score on the test, because the test is measuring your English language ability.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to be familiar with the test so that when you face a question, you understand what that question is asking of you, and therefore you can respond appropriately. So that's the two key things. Learn the language as you are doing, continue to learn the language, try to remedy areas where you are less capable. And for many people in the world, speaking is a skill that they find more difficult. Excuse me. But then be familiar with what the test wants you to do, so that you can do your best on that particular day when you're taking the test.
Mm-hmm. Would you say the exposure for these item types and digital reality, let's say, is essential for the test takers before they take the actual test, so that they would have a chance to practice?
I think, yeah, I think that the test taker will perform better if they know what types of questions they are going to face. I think it's true of any testing. It doesn't matter whether it's digital testing or face-to-face testing or your school testing. You know, if you know what is going to be asked of you, then you, as a test taker, you will do better. We sometimes have this situation when we develop a test or a new product, and the teacher will go through and try the product, and they'll say, oh, this doesn't work and that doesn't work and the other doesn't work, because they're looking at it from a teacher perspective. From a test taker's perspective, all you should be looking at is, this is the question, I know how to respond, this is my response. And then that will help them really. As I say, the test is there to measure their language ability. So if they perform as best as they can using their linguistic resources that they have, then they'll get the higher score.
Mm-hmm. Super. And you mentioned something about future development, and looking at your knowledge and your experience when you were starting, when we are right now. If we could move into the future a bit, what are your expectations of how will those systems are likely to develop? What's going to happen in the world of automatic scoring and online testing? Any potential next stages that you can predict, I might say?
Well, yeah, I mean, predict and it's things we're working on anyway. As you know, we have to look forward as an organization, so it's things that we're looking at. I mean, one of the advantages of all this kind of data that you have is, we can, and I know this sounds terrible, but if there are some students and some people who try to go around the test and circumvent the test and what's required on it.
Yeah.
But because everything is digital, we can analyze things very, very quickly. We can analyze essay responses. Now, we don't have a lot of problems with the kind of, like the generative AI people, because often they don't have access to that while they're doing our tests. But certainly, we're able to detect some kinds of maladministration much more easily than if you just do paper and pencil. But that's the kind of the bad side. But technology helps a lot there, and certainly that is being developed for tests like IELTS, like TOEFL, like Pearson Academic. All of those tests, they have to produce as far as possible accurate results, and so they have to mitigate any kind of malpractice that might happen.
So actually,
In
that's a good
terms of,
side. Good side.
yes,
That,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
well, yeah, because your test result should reflect your score. And if you get a certain score, you can get into a university, or you can move to a different country. A lot of things rely on those things. And that can be the problem. High stakes tests, that it opens a lot of opportunities and doors. Yes, in terms of differences in testing, one area that we're looking into that's quite interesting is augmented reality. So people will know about, these kind of headsets where you can, you can be put into a different situation, and then you can have a person or an avatar or whatever. asking you questions, or you can, you have to react in a certain way. So augmented reality offers opportunities. And I know a lot of people in education and assessment are looking into how that can be adapted and used. So really trying to make things much more real. And I think this is the kind of the two areas I think that we should be trying to work on is authenticity of, for example, a conversation, making, so tests become more and more authentic in terms of their content and in terms of the things we ask people to do. So I think authenticity is good. And one thing we looked at as well is personalization. If you can, for example, you're working in banking and you want to take a test, could that be more focused, the test on the area that you know more about, so you're more familiar with that, so you're going to get a score which represents how you probably would perform at work because the contexts are familiar to you. Working in a shop, maybe it's different. Working in a hotel, maybe it's different. So there's a kind of personalization, or why should everybody have to answer a question on football, for example, or baseball? Some people are just not interested in sport. So what you get in tests really is a kind of common denominators kind of thing. So people say sometimes that test content is very bland because it doesn't want to upset anybody and it can't be very, very specific. But could you have test content which was more based on your own personal interests and experience? I mean, that will be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. So these are the ways to be explored, and we can be sure that we could expect some changes in the forthcoming years, looking
Yeah.
at the speed of the AI development.
Yes, technology will enable some of this. Yes. I mean, that's the key thing as well. And when I talk in conferences and things, I talk about technology as an enabler, helping us to do things. And that's how it should be. So technology should help us do things so authenticity is really important, authentic conversation, as you say, so if technology can help us make our tests and make our teaching more authentic, then that's a good thing. Yeah. If technology can help us personalize things, so I'm taking a test and at least the content is familiar to me and I'm interested in it, so I'm motivated, then that's a good thing. So so we should use the technology in order to move forward on things that will make our assessments better, make them, because all we want really is a fair measure of somebody's language ability. That's all we're looking for. So we're just looking to give an accurate measure of their language ability so they can use that either to further their learning, find out the areas they're weak in, work on those, or to get somewhere that they want to be, a university, different country, whatever their goal is in life. All we want to do is give them that score so that can help them. Obviously, some people get a score and it doesn't help them. I mean, that's, again, the nature of testing.
The nature of human beings. But what I see from what you just said, so if I am the candidate and just taking the international certificate because I want to apply for a higher position, so once I take the test and I get the score should be so reliable that my future employer wouldn't be surprised by the discrepancy between my language score that I present on the certificate and my realistic language skills. So if I end up as like B2 or C1, actually I'm C1, not a different person like C1 on the computer-based test, and the reality is like barely B1 plus. So this being reliable, to have this close match between the skills being examined and the reality, which is to be presented in the human interaction later on.
And you talked earlier about history, and of course I'm quite old, so I remember history quite well. And there was a test which just tested listening and reading. Okay, so people took the listening and reading test, they took the test, they got a very high score, but they couldn't speak. So then there's a big mismatch between the score that you're presenting and the ability that you've got to communicate. Yeah. You've got this really high score, on the scale, but you can't actually communicate in the language. So that is a problem. So underpinning all of our tests is a communicative methodology. So we're not, what we try and do is like you said in the PEIC, is measure the 4 skills. Some of our tests, I agree that one of the placement tests, the level test, just tests 3 skills. But realistically, if you want to get a score that represents your ability in that language, you should test the 4 skills. It should be communicative. So yes, that exactly how you say, the level that your certificate says should represent how well your ability actually is. And if there's another speaker of the language and they understand different levels of performance, they should be able to say, oh yes, his English is quite good. Yes, he can, or he or she, they can have that job because they communicate quite well, So yeah, they should be, you should be recognized by others as having that skill in the language.
Super. And this is similar to something that sometimes we hear, that there are some people, as you mentioned before, I believe that for some of them, like test takers or even the prep providers, the main idea in life is to discover the way how can they game the system, as if there is a major purpose of education. And instead of trying to discover how can you potentially cheat, try to discover how can you employ the best teaching methods to provide the best teaching results and the best exam result, so that when the exam is over, they will go into life with an open conversation, and they will be able to handle this conversation in everyday situation. Because the gaming and trying to discover those, let's say, secret strategies will not allow them to function effectively once they enter the job market or the educational markets, because the professors or the bosses, sooner or later, they will discover that someone is learning by heart all the emails and all the documents and just reciting everything without any flexibility and openness.
Yeah, it's, again, as you said, it's like the human condition in a way. You hope that people do not gain from that. You also hope that people like Pearson or groups like Pearson are trying to catch them. So we don't give them the score if they don't deserve that score. So I think that so there's that, but we've all seen people who've got on in life, through elements of mischief or illegality. So yeah, but hopefully we can minimize that and we can make sure, because what we want is the student or the test taker to take a test and for that to be a valid measure, so that they can use that and that can be trusted by other people to be that measure. So this is really, it is what we work on. We're very conscious of these requirements in term, and the context of assessment is very high stakes really in the wider world. Getting the score for many things does have an impact and does have a meaning. Super. And certainly, as I've been part of testing organizations for the last 25 years, and in all of them, people have taken that responsibility very seriously.
Mm-hmm. So the final remarks. Imagine, David, that there is a teacher, and what pieces of advice would you leave with this person? And quite not sure, a bit afraid of getting into this digital testing, like introducing the placement test at the very beginning and finishing the exam course using the international certificate or the traditional based pen and paper, and is slightly reluctant, is not knowing whether it's worth getting into it. Are there any pieces of advice that you think might be good to leave with this person, not to convince, but to open the choice for this person?
Yeah. Exactly. And far be it from me to lecture teachers on the learning. I mean, I was a teacher myself and used different methods and was interested in computers at an early stage, but that didn't mean that most of my teaching was not using computers. That's the way it is. I think sometimes, especially if you get used to these systems, they can save you a bit of time and energy. So for example, say you've got a group of students and you want to place them in classes by their level. You know, you can sit there, you can develop a test if you want. You can sit and talk to every student. You know, but these things take time. So, you know, so a placement test can be really useful in a lot of contexts for just, you know, putting students into broad groups and, you know, right, so this is the top set, this is the middle set, this is the lower set. And then you can actually, you know, tailor your materials to those particular students. So it partly depends on your context. But certainly if you've got a mixed ability class, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to work out what you're teaching somebody if you've got somebody who's at A2 and somebody who's at B2. So, you know, you know, placement test or a level test can take a lot of kind of, you know, difficulty out of that. Also, it's independent. So, you know, when you're a teacher, you know, you might make it, oh, I think you're this level, I think you're that level. You know, the student goes, oh, well, you know, she said I was A2, but I'm sure I'm higher than that. You know, if you got a score, you say, well, you scored 42, so you're with this other group of people. So I think it can be helpful like that. But I think having an exam at the end of a course of study is just something good to aim at. So you know, when you finish this course, you know, you can take the level, you know, the A2 level or the B1 level, something to aim at and something that then gives recognition to the student that they've actually achieved a certain level. I think you know, we talk about achievement tests. And I think that's the important thing to show the student has, you know, after a year's study, there's this thing that says you are this. I mean, I go back to it's not really my background, but I always think about people who do music, and they've got all the different diplomas on the wall, you know, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. You know, that, you know, as their musical ability has improved, they've got recognition of that. And I think it's good for students to have the same thing for their languages. You know, if they can improve and get a different level, good for them. You know, if they get B1, excellent. You know, B1's a great level. You know, you can communicate effectively at B1. B2, you know, you're really, you know, able to act very, very independently. So these are, you know, things, achievements that count, I think, to the student and in the real world.
So the automatic scoring is not something we should be afraid of, and it's not something that we should treat as an enemy to our own traditional forms.
No, it's just there to facilitate that scoring.
Okay.
Just to facilitate the assessment, the accurate assessment of the person's language ability. That's all the automated scoring is there for.
Super. Thanks a lot, David. And I guess this is like 1 hour of conversation, so it flew really, really quickly. Some of the questions that were asked were already answered within the talk. So thank you all for being with us and for listening, and thank you, David, for sharing with us your thoughts on AI and automatic scoring from the expert perspective about the past, present, and future. So recording will be available on the Teacher Training Academy website. And the next month, we'll start moving slowly towards specific products. So we'll start off with the placement. So we'll have a session with Mike Mayer talking about the placement, the role, the importance of placing students. And then we'll have the practitioner experience. So the things you need to remember when you put things into practice once as a school, as a language provider, when you decide to go for the placement test or for the benchmark test. So we'll share with you some tangible tips on how to make it work from the practical point of view. And all those sessions will be recorded as well. You will get from us a mini takeaway summary, as you get from us the same from the first webinar. And I will share with you the survey after the webinar, and the certificate. You will get it tomorrow or on Monday on your mailbox. Thanks a lot for being with us, and enjoy the rest of your beautiful day. Thank you, David, for providing the deep knowledge and the deep information about automatic scoring. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Thank you.